You can take my iPad, but you cannot take my freedom. Google apologizes and introduces the developer version of Android O, which I think should be called Android Orange or Android Orzo, and I'm sticking by that. Also, Jake Castronekis is here to talk about how Netflix has changed its stance on net neutrality. All that and a whole lot more coming up on Tech News Today.
This is Twit. Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today, episode 1729, recorded Tuesday, March 21st, 2017. This episode of Tech News Today is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. When it comes to the big decision of choosing a mortgage lender, work with one that has your best interest in mind. Use Rocket Mortgage for a transparent, trustworthy home loan process that's completely online at quickenloans.com/TNT.
Welcome to Tech News Today. This is the show where we tell you every single thing you need to know about technology that happened today or around today. I'm Megan Maroney.
I'm Nathan Olivares-Giles.
And happy 11th birthday, Twitter. On March 21st, 2006 at 12:50 p.m., Jack Dorsey sent the very first tweet, which is, of course, just setting up my Twitter.
A pretty amazing tweet. Like, that's what a lot of people probably set up for their first one. The only thing that could have been better would be like a picture of his lunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It's so weird. It's like there's no capitalization, no period. Twitter is spelled like the stocks. Oh, no, that was what Twitter was called back then,
Yeah,
right?
it was called
no vowels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a great like throwback to, I mean, unwittingly, you know, it's like that captured the name, the idea at the moment. Pretty great.
Yeah. And then would you imagine that it would be like this thing that people make reference to and, you know, court hearings and the like. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it went from that to all it is today and all of its glory and investor frustration. And I love Twitter. I love Twitter.
Well, Apple made a plentitude of announcements this morning with very little fanfare. Instead of a big invite-only media event, they released the news and then some products to a handful of journalists. Here's the biggest news. A cheaper iPad. Apple replaced the iPad Air with a new 9.7-inch iPad simply called the iPad. It will be thicker, heavier, and faster with an A9 chip. It starts at $329 for 32 gigabytes and $429 for 128 gigabytes. Everyone is thrilled at the news except my dad, who just replaced his old iPad with a 9.7-inch iPad Pro for $600. He actually asked his daughter, the iOS expert, "You don't think any new iPads are coming out anytime soon, do you?" I was like, no, I haven't heard a thing about it.
Brutal.
So, I know. So Apple also announced a special edition Project Red iPhone 7. It costs $100 more than the regular iPhone 7. Every purchase of the Red iPhone contributes to the Global Fund to support HIV/AIDS programs. And finally, this is only the third thing. Told you there was a plentitude.
So much.
Say goodbye to the 16 gigabyte iPhone. Apple released 2 new iPhone SEs with double the storage at 32 gigabytes and 128 gigabytes, but no other changes. And finally, Apple teased a new app that will probably come out with iOS 10.3. It's called Clips. It's essentially Snapchat. They say it's a new app for making and sharing fun videos. Okay, so let's start with your thoughts on new iPad, the iPad.
Well, what can I say here? I feel bad for your dad for one thing, but I don't know. It's a little lackluster. There were rumors of an iPad Mini coming out with pro features. And this makes sense. It makes sense that do a little bit of a spec bump, drop the price, get more people to buy it. The iPad's had stagnating sales for a while. I think one of the issues for investors, more so maybe than Apple itself, is that people hold on to their iPads for a really long time. In some cases, 5 or 6 years, longer than you hold on to even a laptop. So they're not replacing them every year or two the way they would a smartphone. So I don't see this like juicing up the sales in a significant way to change that bell curve, but it's a good move on Apple's part. The price cut is great. The spec bump is great. Getting rid of the Air name makes sense. You just have the Pro, you have the regular model, but it isn't any of the like really wowing stuff you wanted to see. At least I wanted to see. So I guess it makes sense that it would be kind of a quiet update online rather than a big event.
Mm-hmm. So none of the Apple things were anything that you wanted to see, or just the iPad wasn't?
No, pretty much none of this. Well, okay. Getting rid of the 16 gigabyte iPhone, that I wanted to see. You know, I want to say thank you, Apple, but really, this is something they should have done a long time ago in many ways. I mean, when the first 16 gigabyte model came out, it wasn't enough storage back then. So I think it's great that they're giving people more bang for their buck, so to speak, here. But I wonder if some of that had simply to do with like supply chain commitments, and they years ago committed to buying, you know, memory this far out or something. But no, I think that's a good announcement. But yeah, the sort of stuff that I want to see really wasn't quite addressed today.
Yeah. Well, the 16 gigabyte iPhone, I've told, was used in the enterprise a lot. Like people would use it as, you know, a work phone. We don't want you to store everything, you know, all your stuff on here. We just want you to be able to have an iPhone. But I don't know. I mean, just the operating system alone is so big that you could really fit nothing. And if you're going to use it for the enterprise, you know, you're probably going to have software on it, maybe like Slack or, you know, HipChat, something like that.
Exactly.
So that wouldn't even fit.
Allow people to be productive. Give them the space to do their work. Give them the documents, whatever it is you want to give. So I don't buy that excuse.
Okay. What about the red iPhone? I think it looks nice.
Well, that I like. I think the red iPhone looks really, really cool. But I kind of wish it had a black face instead of the white front. But you know, I'd love to see one in person. The red sure does look sharp. And though now I have like this dark gray case. In the past, I usually go with a red case. So I like this. And how much of the proceeds are going to go to Project Red to support AIDS research?
Well, generally, they don't say on the website, on the Apple website. I went to the Project Red website, and traditionally it's 50% of the profit goes the company that makes the product Red, you know, whether it be a sweater or an iPhone or an iPhone case, they give it to the Global Fund, and the Global Fund uses 100% of that, no overhead, for AIDS research and AIDS, you know, programs. So Burke says $50, but I don't know. But that's the question. It's like, what's the profit on an iPhone? Like, I don't know. Is it the profit can't be just $100?
Well, this is Apple's most profitable product. This is where they make the majority of their revenue, right? So with that $100 spec bump, it would have been nice to see Apple really come out in the clear and say, listen, this $100, that's all going to Project Red. We're not going to give any of our profit margins away. We still got to pay our bills and do what we got to do. But this $100 is going specifically to Project Red. They didn't necessarily make that clear or transparent. You know, it'd be nice if the company did at some point, or hey, you know, Bono, send a tweet or something, man. Let us know. But yeah, with that $100 price bump, you got to wonder, is only $50 of that going to Apple and $50 going to Project Red, or all of it?
And you made a good point of, you know, they're not making as many red iPhones as they are the glossy or the matte. And so maybe the profit margin would be smaller.
Yes. Yeah. You know, the more gold iPhones they make, the cheaper it is to make a gold iPhone. The more black iPhones they make, the cheaper it is to make a black one. And it seems like all the Project Red stuff, whether it's from the Gap or whether it's from Apple, is a little bit more limited run. So I could see them arguing that, hey, our profit margins are going to be slimmer on this one because we got to get that red anodization or whatever. But again, that's not really clear to the consumers. So it would be nice to know where your money's going.
Exactly. So did we cover everything? Oh, the Clips app that's not out yet. It looks like you can send fun videos, overlays.
It's hard to judge that until we can try it, right?
Yeah.
But an app that allows you to make videos for other social networks, I mean, that's a utility, but it also seems kind of a little like, why? You know, I mean, especially in part that what Apple offers to iPhone users and buyers is an app store full of creativity and third parties that are just going to give you cool stuff like this, right? So I do kind of wonder, like, what apps could they possibly put out of business in releasing this?
Yeah, I heard somebody, I think it was on the USA Today news. They have a podcast and called Talking Tech, and he made the point that Apple doesn't have that many apps that people use regularly, not as much as Snapchat or Facebook. But that, I mean, is that true? Like, what about messages? You know, I mean, more people must use messages than Snapchat.
Oh yeah, iMessages is hugely popular, and the most popular mapping app on iOS is actually Apple Maps. Despite it having a history of not being great, it's kind of turned a corner, gotten a lot better in the last few years, and a lot of people just use what's the default. So, yeah, maybe there's not dozens and dozens of apps that people are going to every day, but stuff like iMessage, stuff like your camera, some of those things are indispensable.
Yeah, or notes. I mean, that's the thing. Like Apple, like Apple Maps. Apple had a lot of apps that started out kind of cruddy. Like they weren't that great, but then they saw all these independent app makers and how they did things, and now they're the thing. I mean, you use Notes. I use Notes. It's
every day.
Just, it's built in. It's easy. It's syncable across everything.
I used to hate Notes and reminders and iCloud in general, but I rely on it every single day now.
All right, there was other news today.
There was so much other news today. So President Trump has failed twice with attempted bans on immigrants from select Muslim-majority nations thanks to federal courts. But while the Trump administration hasn't been able to keep people out the way that it would like, it's now targeting something different: gadgets. On Tuesday, the United States and the United Kingdom both announced that they were issuing a ban on the use of electronic devices larger than a smartphone in plane cabins from a total of 10 Muslim-majority nations. Electronics like laptops, e-readers, handheld gaming devices, and cameras have to be stowed away in checked luggage, and they can't be taken out into the cabin or used during flights. Now, all of these flights are specifically ones that are bound to the U.S. or the UK. Packing these devices away in carry-ons won't be an option, and the electronic usage ban applies specifically to passengers, so flight and cabin crews won't be affected under these new restrictions. Both the U.S. and the U.K. bans cover flights from Turkey, Jordan, and Egypt into the U.S. or the U.K. The U.S. is also extending its rules to flights from Morocco, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. And the UK is extending its rules to Lebanon, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. So a pretty interesting, I don't think it's the sort of thing that people saw coming necessarily today, but what do you think of this? A lot of experts have come out and said that it doesn't quite make sense that you'd be able to use your phone, but not, your Nintendo 3DS or your iPad or some other sort of electronic device.
Your Switch.
Your Switch, which I love. This is really going to piss off a lot of business travelers too.
Yeah. I'm of two minds of this. Like one side is like, oh, we're not supposed to question this. So, they're keeping us from terrorists. I will take off my shoes. I will pour out my water bottle and I will not question that. And in one sense, like I prefer all that to not letting anyone in the country or to, handing over my Twitter password or anything like that, or asking someone else to hand over theirs, these particular groups of people that they're targeting with this. So yeah, but the other side is like, why? With water, there was an explanation. Liquids, there was a very clear explanation of that. With shoes, there was an explanation. And I've heard a lot of people today complaining like this, this is all Trump's fault. This is happening so fast. But water and shoes also happened fast. It was just like, it was sent down. It wasn't like a lot of us got to say like whether we agreed or not. We didn't get to make public comments like you do on net neutrality. It was just, this is what is happening. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess the discriminatory targeting, and that's what the ACLU calls it, and I think they will take up this cause as they've taken up others. I do think that that's what's problematic about this.
Yeah, definitely. The fact, everyone has to take off their shoes at the airport, I guess except for the elderly, right? This isn't something that will affect every country or every flight. It's specifically a small group of Muslim-majority nations. But The Guardian had a really interesting piece, actually speaking with computer science professors, folks working in tech, and they point out very well that concerns over how a device could be used for a potential terrorist attack, whether that device itself is a bomb or if it's something triggering some sort of other device somewhere else. Smartphones are computers too, and they can do just as much, if not more, than a Nintendo Switch or an iPad or a portable DVD player or whatever it might be. I do wonder, though, if phablets will count as phones or tablets, and also how long it'll be before an airline maybe starts handing out iPads and charging people to rent them during the flight. From a simple entertainment perspective, these flights are going to be a lot more boring if you have less to do.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's absolutely true. The other confusing thing is they're just not allowed in your checked baggage. They are allowed in your checked baggage. You can allow
no, only the stowaway. So yeah, only the checked baggage. So if you do carry-ons, I never, and now granted I pack pretty light, I'm a pretty simple guy, but I almost never check baggage. I'm always doing carry-ons. So
you're that guy who fills up the overhead compartment.
Just one up top and one down below. Yes, I am that guy who takes up all the overhead bin space, right? And these rules are being rolled out right now, and it's going to catch a lot of people off guard who are in the midst of traveling, and some people might not actually have a bag to check things into, right? I think this might actually discourage people from visiting the U.S. I do wonder if that's going to be the case.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate. Burke had a point that the bigger the device, the bigger the bomb, but you can put it in a bomb can go in the below that was what exploded in, I think, the Russian
Yes.
it was not in the checked baggage.
Yeah,
it was underneath, and so that can happen. It's just the arbitrariness.
It does
of
seem
this.
arbitrary. It really feels like it was a rule that was made up by folks who just don't understand how technology works to a certain extent. And in that same Guardian piece that noted tech experts on how technology works, they also mentioned that the FAA itself has internal worries that putting all these lithium-ion batteries together in hot undercarriage, potentially overheating sort of situations, could pose a safety risk as well. So just as with other executive orders, this is a somewhat dynamic and fluid situation. The Department of Homeland Security is, of course, arguing that this is something that will make Americans safer. And they're, as you can see, if you look up the stories that are out there, and of course the ones that we mentioned here, there is a debate about that, but pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, putting the batteries together, that is a really good point. Because if you think about the Galaxy Note 7 that they set on fire but you knew that they were on fire because they were in the person's hand, or they were sitting on they were with them. So imagine these devices, under the plane, that you don't know when they start smoking and then they're on fire until it's really too late.
Yeah, I wonder if this will be one of those executive orders that maybe they take back, modify a little bit, and then bring back. We'll see. We'll find out.
Yeah, a take back. I like that. Bloomberg says chip designer ARM just announced Dynamic. That's Dynam IQ. It's a new chip technology designed for self-driving cars. This news comes less than a week after Intel announced their purchase of self-driving tech company Mobileye. So the self-driving chip race is officially on. ARM hopes Dynamic will help power the AI in all of our Internet of Things devices, which ARM says will benefit from a 50-fold boost in machine learning over the next 3 to 5 years. So this is a big deal, big race. I hate to use the word race in the self-driving car, but I will. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the race is on. It seems like it's really pretty interesting to see all of these different companies get in there and try and have a piece of it, right? The fact of the matter is so many different things that we have these days are having chips put into them, whether they need them or not. But with self-driving cars and AI, this is really one of those spaces where the more sensors, it seems like you would think, the better, right? The better of an understanding of the environment around you, hopefully the better that car will be. And there were some recent reports on Uber's self-driving cars noting that, like, I think once every hour, a human being had to take control of that car. So this is early days. There's still a long way to go with AI and self-driving cars and bringing those two things together. So, it is pretty interesting stuff here. And ARM, their basic chip designs, which are kind of the foundation of all the processors in your smartphones, and maybe some days even your laptops, they seem to really understand how to design efficient, simple chipsets that can do a lot, very versatile stuff. So them taking this serious, I think, is a good sign overall for kind of the movement forward, you could say, of this automotive technology. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, for the second year in a row, Google is unveiling its newest version of Android in March. On Tuesday, Google released Android O to developers ahead of an expected consumer release this fall. The big features so far: better battery life and improved notifications. David Burke, the Google vice president who oversees Android engineering, says that O will attempt to significantly improve battery life by getting a handle on what apps are doing in the background when you're not using them. There are 3 areas O will focus on to pull all this off: implicit broadcasts, background services, and location updates. Notifications will be grouped into what Google is calling channels, so you can get to what's the most important as quickly as possible. And it sounds like it's going to work a bit like the way that you use Gmail categories to help you kind of decipher what's there. And you'll also be able to snooze away a notification like you can do in email and Gmail specifically. So what do you think here? I mean, notifications of battery life, definitely nothing anyone can be mad at, but at the same time, not necessarily the sexiest of features. It's like, is that the best you got, Google? I know it's early, and hopefully by the fall, is going to be looking a lot better here, but really, like, that's all you got for me today?
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is just the early announcements because this is for developers, right?
Yeah,
so, like, it's developers that need to work on, getting their notifications and their, background, managing their background battery. That was one of my biggest issues when I used the Pixel for a month was just how fast the battery died out. And,
man,
people are just like, well, that's because you have this running and this running. And it's like, well, Apple
How
just
do
does
know?
that for me.
Yep.
And they control, they're the, big dad saying, no, you can't, run in the background. You can't use that much battery there. And I like that. I like that. That paternalness of Apple, but so this will be good for Google, for Android users, I think. And yeah, snoozing your notifications. I love the way Gmail works. I wish there was a way to snooze. I don't think there is. Is there a way to snooze notifications on iOS? I don't know if they're just like the regular iOS.
I'm not sure because I'm like one of those people who hate seeing the little bubble. It says like 8. Yeah. So like I'll immediately like delete or archive messages. So I think
the
little
red badge? You can take those off,
I know, but I still know it's there.
No,
I think I'm just too OCD to let that happen.
If you took it off, you would forget. I think you would forget it
I
was there. Those badges. Nobody needs those. Yeah, I'm learning all kinds of good things about you. Interesting.
But also with every Android release, alphabetically, speaking here, there's an opportunity for a new fun name, and I was a little disappointed by Android N being nougat.
Yeah, well, because people like to call it nougat, and that sounds bad.
So what do you think for O will be?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of talk of Oreos, and there was a lot of Twitter fights. Apparently, there's some sort of British or Australian like Oreo thing that has another name that doesn't start with O.
Okay.
So that wasted a lot of time. I'm never going to get back learning about that.
There's not as much O desserts as I thought there would be, to be honest. I did a little Googling.
It doesn't have to be a dessert. It could be a tasty treat.
Yeah. And honeycomb, I mean, like, people usually don't eat the honeycombs themselves, but sometimes they do. So, yeah, it can be in that kind of sweet, arena, so to speak.
Like an orange.
An orange actually wouldn't be so bad because it'd be kind of like Google saying, hey, have your sweets, but do it the healthy way.
Right,
You don't need all that fake sugar.
Exactly, yeah.
Oatmeal cookies there. Ozark pudding, not the most popular pudding.
What is Ozark
pudding? Like a weird nut pudding.
Oh. Yeah. No, you can't follow nougat with weird nut pudding.
I mean, nougat is probably the worst of all. I mean, we went from cupcake to donut to eclair. I mean, we had a really nice run. Ice cream sandwich. I love ice cream sandwiches.
Oh, Virgil in chat room says, "Oh, Henry chocolate bar."
Oh, Henry chocolate bar. That's an option.
What's Ozo?
I don't know.
Ozo.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess we'll have to see what Google chooses on that end. Either way, very important questions that we hope Google answers soon.
And we have some other Google news. After apologizing yesterday, the company now says they're revamping their advertising policy in order to avoid ads being automatically placed on extremist content. In a blog post, Chief Business Officer Philip Schindler says the company is raising the bar, tightening safeguards, improving transparency, and employing several other positive-sounding gerunds. So, yeah, this is very exciting. And yesterday we said do better. So it sounds like they're doing better. I have no complaints yet. I mean, broadening the policy on hate speech also, that is good because that's a line that we are being faced with more often on the internet now. So really, I think it's internet companies' responsibility to really say, like, here's how hate speech is defined. Here is how violence is defined. And so some big advertisers are impressed with their swift action. But what I wonder is part of what they're really saying is they're going to give the marketers more control. And so what we talked about yesterday is like, this is not easy for, you can't hire enough humans to make it economically feasible, and the algorithm is going to make mistakes. So just handing it over to the marketers, is that just sort of like passing the buck?
Yeah. I think it is. I mean, I think it is. The fact of the matter is right now the technology might not be good enough, isn't good enough to totally solve this problem. So they might need the marketers' help. So it might be a mixture of passing the buck and saying, hey, this isn't just all on us. But it might also be the simple fact of the matter that maybe the problem's just too big. The internet's too big of a place. And as much as Google has data on lots of things and has everything categorized, they don't have everything categorized, right? So and identified. So yeah, this might be one of those situations where it's passing the buck, and they also just might not be able to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see, I guess.
All right, well, next up, we'll delve into Netflix's changing stance on net neutrality. But first, let's take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's episode. This episode of Tech News Today is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. If you've ever tried to get a loan of any kind, you know it can be tedious. I'm looking for a car loan these days, and visiting banks in person, shuffling around paperwork, the whole process honestly can be a pain. Well, on the home mortgage side of things at least, it doesn't have to be that way. When it comes to the big decision of choosing a mortgage lender, it's important to know that you're working with someone who you can trust and who has your best interest in mind. With Rocket Mortgage, you get a transparent online process that gives you the confidence to make an informed decision. Don't waste time searching through stacks of paperwork. With Rocket Mortgage, you can securely share your financial information and get a mortgage approval in minutes. You can even adjust the rate and the length of your loan in real time to make sure that you get the mortgage solution that's right for you. Whether you're looking to buy a home or refinance your existing mortgage, you can lift the burden of getting a home loan with Rocket Mortgage. Skip the bank, skip the waiting, and go completely online at quickenloans.com/TNT. That's quickenloans.com/TNT. Quicken Loans is an equal housing lender licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org, number 3030. And we thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans for their support. In the past, attacks on net neutrality, the policy that calls on internet service providers to treat all traffic equally, has turned some of the biggest names in tech into activists. Not many voices have been louder than Netflix in defending net neutrality. But as Jacob Kastronekis from The Verge noted in a recent report, Netflix has a history of flip-flopping, and it seems to be softening its stance in the Trump era. Jacob, take us through your story. What's Netflix's stance today, and how does that differ from where it's been in the past?
Yeah, so like you were saying, when the big net neutrality fight was happening 2 years ago, Netflix was one of the more vocal proponents of it. They were clear activists. And things have sort of softened since then. And just last week, my colleague Lauren Good asked Netflix's CEO, Reed Hastings, what he thinks about net neutrality coming under attack by the Trump administration. And he says, well, we're not too worried. And here, I'm just going to read this to you. He says, quote, "The culture around net neutrality is very strong. The expectations of consumers are very strong. So even if the formal framework gets weakened, we don't see a big risk actualizing because consumers know they're entitled to getting all of the web services." So basically, rather than going out and saying, hey, we're worried about this, we need to maintain strong net neutrality, Netflix has now gone to the side where they're like, well, you know, it wouldn't be the worst thing. I think everything will work out more or less fine. And the thing is, if you look through all the statements Netflix has made over the years, they sort of get weaker and weaker as Netflix gets bigger and bigger. I think there's sort of a clear reason why. Back in 2012, when Netflix came out really strong for net neutrality, well, Netflix's streaming service is only a year old. It was pretty small. And it was one of the services that would get discriminated against in a web that did not have net neutrality rules. But now it's 2017. Netflix is enormous. It has a ton of cash, and it has the ability to negotiate with internet providers. And so were the tides to turn, and it looks like things might get shaken up a little bit, Netflix would be in a fairly good position. And so it doesn't really have to worry about this. And the unfortunate reality is that it's almost advantageous to Netflix on some level if these smaller streaming startups have a tougher time getting started.
So basically, there's kind of a competitive advantage for Netflix if the internet shifts to a pay-to-play model because it can afford to pay where others can't.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so I don't want to say that Netflix is now, completely gone to the dark side. It's not like they've said, oh, we changed our mind, net neutrality is bad. We would love to sponsor our way into your home and screw over the small guys. But, there's a very clear change in tone from what we heard a few years ago. Whereas a few years ago, Netflix was very clear about its support for net neutrality. Now it sounds like it's saying, it's not the worst thing in the world. We'll be fine. And that is a very clear difference. And I think, you're right that this is because Netflix doesn't have to worry quite so much. Sorry, what's that?
I was going to say the one thing I really like about your piece is that it goes through the timeline and comparing each point with like the amount of subscribers and their stock price and how their what they said about net neutrality really changed over those years. Because I think net neutrality, for someone who really hasn't paid much attention to the way the pipes work, it's confusing for people. And so there was always this idea, like, oh, hey, Netflix is on our team, and it. And now it's frustrating. I think of I like to compare most things to Taylor Swift in technology. That's how it helps me understand it. But when she came out against having the free tier on Spotify, it was like she doesn't need that money. Like, it's not, she was just trying to be for the little guy, and that's what I thought that Netflix was for, like the little the people that the way they started. But it's, I guess they're not.
Yeah, it's true. And I think when Netflix was being a big supporter of net neutrality, it was very much on the way up. It was still on the rise. It still needed to make sure that the road was clear for it to deliver things. And again, it's not like Netflix has come out in opposition to it or anything, but it's a very clear change of tone. Because before, in 2012, Reed Hastings, Netflix's CEO, wrote a Facebook post calling out Comcast when Comcast started favoring its own cable service over stuff like Netflix. And he said, absolutely no way should that be allowed to happen. And now Netflix is starting to do some of those things. And there are certainly gray areas here, like zero rating, which people like somewhat, but it definitely opens the door to that kind of discrimination where Netflix gets favored and the smaller services don't. And, if you go through over the past 5 years, it's interesting because Netflix's interest in net neutrality has sort of changed as it's grown. So at first it was worried about, are we going to have access? Are we going to have different data caps than internet providers' own services? Then later I got worried about this whole interconnect issue where, a company like Comcast or Verizon will charge it a fee since Netflix is sending so much traffic their way. And so, Netflix was claiming that they would get charged twice. And they made a whole big deal about this. And it actually got written into the net neutrality rules that the FCC could look at internet connect agreements. And this is almost entirely because Netflix complained about it. And the big thing right now is that the reason this is coming up again is that there's a new person in charge of the FCC, Ajit Pai, and he is not a fan of the net neutrality rules as they currently stand. 2 years ago, the FCC decided that internet providers are a utility, as they basically just have these, cables that go everywhere and deliver internet. They're not doing too much. And, Pai thinks that's wrong. And we don't know exactly what he's going to do about that, but so far, he's only been on the job about 2 months, but he's rolling back as many net neutrality rules as he possibly can. And so, we thought this fight was over 2 years ago. Well, unfortunately, it is about to get started again, and it's not clear how it's going to go. But chances are, unless people will fight pretty strongly once again, this is going to get weakened because 2 years ago, the Democrats were in charge, and the Democrats generally are much bigger fans of net neutrality. Whereas, the Republican administration and the Trump administration are not fans of it. They want, to just let the market decide and see how it goes. They think there are interesting business opportunities in allowing fast lanes and so on and so forth. And, the Netflix is one of the great examples of why we shouldn't have that, because if Netflix was able to be blocked by, somebody like a Comcast several years back, then it wouldn't have completely, upended how we watch TV and movies. It wouldn't have upended the fact that movies can be released the same day that they premiere in a theater.
So
that's great.
With Netflix kind of backing away from supporting net neutrality, softening its stance, arguably moving to the dark side, if you want to look at it that way, who do we have left? Who else in tech are those champions of net neutrality? And do you see them maybe taking a similar stance as Netflix? Is there any indication that other folks who are vocal supporters of net neutrality in the past are going to back away and follow Netflix in their footsteps?
Yeah, and this is a really good question. It's something that I think is going to be really interesting to see over the coming months. The thing is, most of these companies haven't been pressed on it yet, just because they don't have to. And I think they're probably going to avoid it as much as they can for now, because this is taking a stance that's, opposed to the administration. I think, if we go back a few years, most tech companies were big proponents of net neutrality. If you'll remember, a ton of websites, blacked out or shut down for a day
for the
in
SOPA
protest
and PIPA,
stuff like this. Yes, exactly. And so there are absolutely a ton of net neutrality supporters out there, including from these big companies. The question is how far they're willing to go again, because, it's frustrating having to fight this battle again and again and again. And so we don't know what they're going to do this time. But I think that generally speaking, they agree that having an open web is a positive thing. The trouble is there are different degrees of openness, right? There's the full openness that we have right now under these rules, but people are arguing, well, it can be mostly open, but we can still allow for some special cases. And I think that the question is, are the advocates going to come out again and fight against that, even if they might be able to take advantage of those things?
So I wonder, how important do you think regular people, folks paying those Netflix bills, are going to be into swaying the participation in companies for supporting or not things like Netflix? The delete Uber protests come to mind. And we're able to kind of shift the will of that company, at least get the CEO off of that Trump advisory board and things like this. Do you think that we could see something similar, or is net neutrality just not in the public consciousness at that level? Because from what I remember a few years ago with SOPA PIPA, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like there was a public outcry in support of keeping things open on the web, and we're not seeing that from regular folks right now either yet.
Yeah, no, I think you are right that just Americans are going to play an enormous role here, and they did a few years ago. It's just that right now it's simmering a little bit, right? It hasn't actually. The issue is not back in the public consciousness again. We're still not clear on what's going to happen. I think the threat that net neutrality is going to be reversed or weakened substantially, the threat is there. They're already chipping away at it, but there's no clear signal that it's going to happen. Whereas, 2 or 3 years ago, it was overturned in court and we had nothing. And so there was a very clear reason to fight. But people care about this a lot, right? People care about the internet. People want to fight for this. And we saw that 2 years ago, I think that John Oliver piece was incredibly influential in getting people riled up. And the FCC, which sets these rules, they have to respond to public comments. And so that absolutely plays a role. And I think, public outcry has made it such that even people who don't want, the full strong net neutrality, they would never say that they don't want an open internet. The default stance is that you want an open internet. There's a very good argument to be made that a lot of these people are okay with still, a few too many restrictions on what open means.
They have caveats.
Exactly. But, the public has made it clear that, at a bare minimum, we're talking about degrees of openness, and that's still not a good discussion to be having because it should just be open. But, that's what we have so far. And it's also interesting you bring this up because one of the things that Netflix actually did, and one of the things that I highlighted in this timeline, is a couple of years ago, they said, you know what, if a company like Comcast or Verizon, some internet provider, decides to start throttling us or they won't let us through, we have a bunch of really passionate subscribers and we will have them riot. We will have them freak out on these companies and be a total pain and let them know whose fault this is. And so that's just what Netflix says it can do. And I have no doubt that they're right about that. If Netflix and Google and Facebook or Reddit, these companies have engaged audiences or are able to reach millions and millions of people. And that can go a long way once you tell people what's happening and how bad things could feasibly get. And I think that people responding to that and making it clear that they're not okay with putting restrictions on internet usage is going to be what ultimately, gets us or saves sound net neutrality rules as much as we can.
Well, I think that the problem also is programs like Binge On are attractive to people. Like, oh yeah, well if if I can just get my Netflix or get stream whatever I want and it won't add to my data, then great. Like, what do I care? They're not saying like I don't like an open internet. They're saying like I like to be able to stream a lot of videos, and I get that, and I think that's part of it, and I think it's also part of it is that we live in a different time. I mean, Tom Wheeler didn't believe in net neutrality, and like the John Oliver piece that you talked about, and the hordes of people and the comments, they changed his mind. It feels like it would be much harder to change Ajit Pai's mind. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's true. He's been very clear how he feels about what happened. And the thing is, Chairman Pai, he's again, like everybody else, he says he supports a free and open internet. He would never say otherwise. But he doesn't think there should be strong rules to back it up. And if you don't have that, then you don't really have net neutrality at the end of the day. So that's the problem. And the question is, how far are they going to go when it comes to chipping it back? They've started a little bit, but I don't think there's going to be a full changing his mind. I don't think that's going to happen. But at the end of the day, the FCC still does have an obligation to the public. And so if there are specific areas that the public pushes back on, that makes it harder for him to strip that away. And like you said, something like Binge On, this is where we run into issues, right? Because Pai can point to Binge On and say, people love these programs. They're getting free data. And it's hard to explain why that's bad because it sounds great. You're getting free video. It's not counting toward your data cap. That sounds fantastic. And the issue is that only certain things are counting toward that, right? And so if Netflix doesn't count toward your data cap, but some small upstart service does, then you're never going to use that smaller service. And that's not really free and open. And so, the exact same things that helped Netflix rise, the absence of those data caps, are going to be what helps it stay in control. If we allow things like zero rating and Binge On. And that's much harder to explain away and say, why this is bad and why we need to fight back against this, because the immediate sense is that it's a positive for people. The immediate sense is that this is a good thing.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jake, for explaining this all to us. It's a fascinating issue. Please go to theverge.com and see his report here. It's one of the most detailed things that we've seen on this issue, and it's definitely going to be something that's going to be important over the year and years to come. Thank you so much again for joining us, Jacob. Tell people where they can find you and follow you online.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Jake_K, and you can find my stuff at theverge.com all the time. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
All righty.
Thanks.
Take care. TNT's fan of the day is Nick Burklow, who posted on his Instagram account, which is called Give Me Your Shoes. He says, watching tech news today in the best company. He eats the books and I keep up with the tech news. So have you ever seen a baby watching you before, Nathan?
I think that's a first. Yeah.
Well, the baby isn't really watching you. He's eating the books. And
I wonder if there's anyone who makes edible children's books,
That's good, yeah.
Yeah. There's like those that you can either, sorry,
And
that's
you can't
a total,
read them again.
Yeah, but that kid's not going to read that again. I love the speakers. I love the setup. That's a hell of a man cave. I'm glad you're exposing your kid to some quality entertainment, hopefully, and news, educating a little bit. I'll try not to drop any F-bombs for the babies.
Yeah, we talked about that.
I'll try not to do that. So.
Show us how you watch or listen to TNT. Just record a video and take a picture of yourself or your setup. You can post it to Instagram, Google+, Twitter, or Facebook. Use the hashtag HowIWatchTNT, and we are going to find it. And finally, tonight, you can now use your Amazon Echo to order from Amazon Prime now. And in some areas, that includes booze and many of your other addictions, such as coffee, video games, and even inflatable pools.
Oh, man.
2 hours or less. So you could just say, order me a bag of kettle chips or a pair of running shoes, and then you will get it in 2 hours or less to your door. Now, you never have to get up off the couch, especially if you have like an automatic door opener. And, you don't have to get your phone. Just scream at your Amazon Echo to order you anything. Only in selected areas.
If only I had this in college, beer runs would have been so much more efficient. And I don't know if there's any Last Man on Earth fans out there, but the ability to make a margarita pool within, minutes is just so enticing. I've never really wanted to make a margarita pool before, but it's nice to know you can.
That I was wondering about the inflatable pool. I thought that was the weirdest thing, but you're saying that's what you need.
Have you seen this show?
No.
So in the show, The Last Man on Earth, he fills a pool with a margarita and then he just drinks. It's pretty gross, actually, but that, the fact that you can do this in minutes. Thank you, Amazon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. 120 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't know. That might be too long.
Or less.
Yeah, or less. True.
If it goes 125, I hope you get a discount.
Yeah.
I'm going to be calling the Prime customer service. They have great customer service. So, yeah. Thanks, Amazon.
The TNT records every Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. That's 23 UTC. At twit.tv/live is where you can watch it. You can be part of the show by emailing us at tnt@twit.tv. Or you can leave us a short voicemail. I think we got one earlier. Leave it at 260-TNT-SHOW. We're not going to answer the phone. Don't worry. Just leave a voicemail. Leave a couple if you don't get it right the first time. We don't judge. You can also hit us up on Twitter. We are at Tech News Today TV.
All right. Find all the ways to subscribe to our show at twit.tv/TNT. And if you want to see us in person, please do. We'd love to have a live audience, and oftentimes we do, a lot of international folks. So just email tickets at twit.tv. And if you want to tweet me, I'm at NateOG on Twitter.
And I am at Megan Maroney on Twitter. Thanks to our technical director, Brian. Thank you to Burke for helping out in the studio. And his Burke Cam, thank you to Kevin for editing the show. And thanks to you for talking tech with us. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Yeah, high five.